A little while back, during a discussion of PvP builds and such, OnlyWaifu had this to say about low-level invaders that are built in such a way as to be nearly invincible.
But aside from that, there's another way to interpret the Reddit post we saw before. The other possibility is that they are talking about hyper twinks, gamers who create a brutally powerful build to use in low level in order to grief both new and experienced players alike. Since the build is usually so powerful that low level gamers need to play unrealistically well in order to beat them. And to this I say, they are right. They suck balls. If any of these Redditors were invaded by a hyper twink, they are rightfully expressing their annoyance.
Now, I don't have any comment about whether hypertwinks suck or not, as I've seen it go either way. However, it did get me thinking about the fact that, save for some basic stuff by Mr. Nobody, low levels are rather bereft of PvP knowledge, or maybe that knowledge is fairly obscure in comparison to the somewhat more accessible knowledge of meta-level builds. So, in an effort to bridge this gap in understanding, I thought it would be a fine idea to offer not just what knowledge I have about low-level builds and the weapons that are meta for these brackets, but also how to beat these builds for the average cooperator or hunter who isn't a hypertwink. It gets a little arcane at times, but as first efforts go, I stand by what I've done here. This discussion assumes you are somewhat familiar with PvP and is not intended for a total beginner, but I have tried to speak as plainly as possible. Before we begin, I want to advise you that I'm not a theory crafting expert, so I encourage you to read the comments below the video in case somebody corrects me on information I might have got wrong. Also, after the video is over, I encourage you to expand your knowledge by checking out Rust Bucket and OnlyWaifu content. Channels I'll link in the description. Oh, and don't forget to like, subscribe, ring the bell, do a little dance, make a little love, and get down tonight. So, on to low-level builds. What even is a build? Well, how I think of it, it's the sum of the base character and the loadouts that character can equip from their inventory. The relative difficulty of playing these builds can be expressed in terms of additional relevant levels of power that you gain from your gear, meaning, stats you'll actually use, strength and dex for a vagabond, not arcane. And I'll refer to these as plus levels. So the lower your plus level, the more difficult the class is to play, but that's not necessarily to say it's weak, as the astrologer will show. So in part 1, let's talk about base characters. If you ask the average invader what base character to use for a low-level build, you'll probably be told to start a vagabond. The vagabond has enough strength, dexterity, endurance, and vigor that it only needs Radagon's Sword Seal, 20 plus levels, in order to equip the widest variety of weaponry of any base character, including such standbys as the Zweihander and Lion Greatbow. Up to an additional 8 relevant plus levels can be gained from your headgear, and a single talisman can grant an additional 5 plus levels for a total relative strength of 33, but the most practical option, the Divine Bird Helm, still grants you a respectable 32. The hero has a less diverse weapon assortment available to him. However, it is the only base class able to use Gugs one-handed. And why would you want to do that? Well, often during invasions, you will be getting spammed with a variety of spells and ashes of war, and a big difference between low-level invasions and high-level invasions is that Carian Retaliation is an effective counter to that spam. Your retaliatory glint blades will usually do more damage than the spell or ash that spawned them, and being able to retaliate while still able to use your weapon is an advantage that cannot be overstated. The hero capable of one-hand Gugs has a strength of 30 plus levels. A rarely used option for pure dexterity is the Samurai. With a starting dexterity of 15, the Samurai can equip Millicent's Prosthesis and the Prosthesis Wearer's Heirloom, alongside the standard Radagon's Sword Seal and optional Curse Blade Mask, for an incredible 35 dexterity. It's not a popular option due to the poor scaling of low-level weaponry, but it can pull off hilarious feats such as using Waterfowl Dance on a starting level character. The Samurai technically weighs in at 35 plus levels, but in practice you're better off with a Vagabond, even for a dexterity build. Outside of predominantly melee builds, we have the Faith and Intelligence casters. When deciding on your base character for this, you should ask yourself if you want to primarily cast or use the weaponry available to these characters. If you mostly want to cast spells, choose Prophet or Astrologer. If you want a Faith or Intelligence melee character, choose Confessor or Prisoner. The Astrologer has the potential to reach astronomical plus levels with double sword seals, but I recommend against it. The raw power is simply not worth going into deeply negative defenses. For similar reasons, I advise you to avoid the Burger King hat, as it reduces your ability to survive otherwise reasonable damage. Instead, I recommend equipping the Queen's Crescent Crown, Stargazer Heirloom, America's Sword Seal, Graven Mask Talisman, and a variable talisman slot that you can alternate between Ritual Sword and Godfrey's Icon. Now you might say, Paul, what about cast speed? Isn't Radagon's Icon worth a theoretical 40 plus levels? Well, sort of. You see, playing a Glass Cannon Astrologer at this level, you only need to be able to survive incidental damage from area of effect attacks while using charged spells such as Gravitational Missile, Star Shower, Collapsing Stars, and so forth from tactically advantageous terrain, such as across gaps or from the high ground. If you find yourself in melee range, you're done fucked up and should reconsider playing this class. The recommended Astrologer build has a difficult but powerful 18 plus levels. A bit less difficult but still comparatively fragile build is the Prophet. There are several ways to build this character, but the most durable and powerful I have yet been able to use is this variant that uses Radagon's Sword Seal, Two Fingers Heirloom, and the Crimson Amber Medallion plus 3. 3 pieces of Rakshasa armor and the Circlet of Light provide tremendous damage boost, decent poise, and 1 plus level. The only incantation you really need is Flame Grant Me Strength, which will allow you to one-shot the majority of players with 1 fire coil, but there are a variety of incantations that are usable with the Faith Not Physic tier and the Elemental Damage tier of your choice. The Prophet clocks in with a rather nebulous 26 plus levels. These are your main traditional builds, but there is one more we need to talk about, the pot build. The pot build is really only possible at low levels and falls off quickly as you go higher than about RL 30. The build is simple: Great Jar Hat, Jar Companion Talisman, a lightweight weapon with Endure, and everything else dedicated to boosting health and defense. This monstrosity is absurdly powerful at base level, and is one of the builds Waifu was talking about when she said Hyper Twinks suck balls. There really is zero skill involved with this build. Endure and use item. Congratulations on your win. If you want to build this, I recommend the Wretch as a base for maximum vigor levels. Which brings us to part 2, statting. Previously I showed you how to make a PvP build that would never give you up nor let you down. You're gonna run around and hurt PvEers. In that video I advised you to level vigor to 60, push endurance high enough to wear your shit, and put the rest into your main damage stat. For low levels, this is slightly different. Low RLs still want to primarily pump vigor, but there is one exception: endurance. It may be worth losing a couple hundred health in order to equip armor with a large amount of poise. If you want to be able to force the enemy to respect your options, then the mathematically optimal armor loadout for low RL is the Divine Bird Helm, Tree Sentinel Armor, and Crucible Knight Greaves with Bolgoat's Talisman. This meets the 88 poise breakpoint at Vagabond's base endurance. For the price of 3 more endurance, you are able to wield the Zweihander and Spiralhorn Shield with the assistance of Radagon's Sword Seal, Great Jar's Arsenal, and Erdtree's Favor plus 2. I can't fully express just how brutal this loadout is. In a bracket where nearly all hosts have less than 50 poise, 88 poise is truly king. If you're playing a Glass Cannon caster, once you have the stats to cast your nastiest, most expensive spell, you can resume pumping vigor. Around RL 30 to 40, you can remove the glass descriptor and just be all cannon. I believe that covers statting, So let's move on to weapons in Part 3. It should come as no surprise that many of the high RL meta weapons and setups such as Shamshir, Halax, and Off-Rack Tooth Whip or what have you are still extremely effective down in the low brackets. However, there are a few additional weapons, consumables, and effects which are nearly broken at low levels, which I want to tell you about. First and foremost is the Dragon Halberd. This weapon is available from the Dragonkin soldier located in the Shifra River area. It features a powerful L2 that boosts attacks with lightning damage and frostbite buildup, which can cause a process effect that reduces stamina recovery on the target, as well as a burst of damage. The running R1 attack is a fast poke, and the weapon pairs well with the Antspur Rapier in your offhand, another top weapon in low level, which we will discuss presently. The Antspur inflicts rot status. This is quite possibly the most rude, broken, bullshit, and cruel thing to use in low RLs, which is why you'll see it in my inventory on every character that can use it. You see, Scarlet Rot does damage over time based on how much health the victim has, as well as applying a flat value of damage over time. If you infuse the Antspur with Blood Loss Effect and the Endure Ash of War, you'll essentially win all but the most brutal trades with any melee opponent. The only effective counterplay is to run the fuck away, which is something most hosts are too stupid to do. The last item I want to bring to your attention is the Spark Aromatic, a consumable that is able to one-shot a vast majority of PvE players, and again, the lower one's level, the more effective this is. Part 4, as promised, is how to counter these builds. You see, there is a 100% effective method for keeping these hyper twinks from reaming your ass 3 sizes bigger, and that method is to play solo. Instead of summoning 2 maximum level babysitters to carry you through trivialized content, consider standing on your own 2 fucking feet. Alternatively, you could level Vigor and haul ass to the boss fog. See, your job isn't to kill the invader, your job is to survive the invasion. This can take many forms, and the most reliable of them is fleeing. Only rarely can I kill you during a boss fight. Thanks for watching this video. I want to thank Jim Rustler for inspiring me to make this after a truly fun evening of dueling his bullshittiest and most hilarious builds. Good luck on the hunt, Fella Red.